Imagine the hills of Thessaly in 197 BC, bathed in the golden light of the rising sun. Two mighty armies face each other, each a symbol of a different world. On one side, the Macedonian phalanx, an army of disciplined spearmen with rows of long sarissas stretching like a forest of deadly spikes. On the other, the Roman legions, smaller, more flexible units moving with precision, their shields locked in perfect formation, ready to adapt to anything the enemy throws at them. This wasn't just a battle for land, it was a battle for the soul of Greece. Macedonia had dominated the Greek city-states for decades, spreading its influence from the mountains to the seas. Rome, fresh from victories against Carthage, had come to the eastern Mediterranean with one goal: to stop Macedonian expansion and assert its own power. The tension was palpable. Every soldier knew that this clash could decide the fate of kingdoms, the balance of power, and the future of an entire region. One wrong move could mean annihilation. One brilliant maneuver could change history forever. In this documentary, we'll dive deep into the strategies, tactics, and drama of the Battle of Cynoscephalae, where Rome and Macedonia collided in a fight that would not only reshape Greece but also showcase the genius of Roman warfare. Get ready to witness the moment when flexibility and discipline triumphed over rigid tradition, and the rise of Rome as the supreme power in the eastern Mediterranean. The rise of Macedonia. Before the Romans arrived on the Greek mainland, Macedonia had already established itself as a dominant power in the region. Under the leadership of kings like Philip II and later his son, Philip V, Macedonia had transformed from a relatively small kingdom into a military powerhouse capable of challenging the great city-states of Greece. Philip V inherited an army that was disciplined, well-trained, and organized around the famous Macedonian phalanx. This formation, with its rows of heavily armored infantry wielding extraordinarily long spears called sarissas, could crush almost any opponent in a head-on confrontation. The phalanx was a symbol of Macedonian strength, nearly impenetrable from the front. It relied on cohesion, discipline, and sheer weight of numbers. Macedonia's ambitions extended far beyond defense. Philip V sought to expand his influence across Greece, challenging the autonomy of city-states like Athens and Thessalonica, and even interfering in the affairs of the Hellenistic kingdoms. Macedonia's control over strategic trade routes, fertile lands, and fortified cities made it a formidable power. By the late 3rd century BC, Macedonia had grown into a regional hegemon, feared by its neighbors. Its army was powerful, its leadership ambitious, and its grip over Greece seemed unshakable. The stage was set for a collision with a new kind of power, the rising Roman Republic, whose legions had already demonstrated their ability to conquer the Mediterranean after defeating Carthage. Macedonia's strength, however, had a critical vulnerability. While the phalanx was devastating in a frontal attack, it was inflexible. It struggled on uneven terrain and could be outmaneuvered by more agile forces. This weakness would prove decisive when Rome's disciplined, adaptable legions faced the Macedonian phalanx at Cynoscephalae. Rome's expansion into Greece. By the early 2nd century BC, Rome had emerged from the Punic Wars as the preeminent power in the western Mediterranean. Its armies were battle-hardened, disciplined, and capable of strategic innovation. After securing dominance over Carthage and much of Italy, Rome began to turn its attention eastward, toward the wealthy and politically fragmented lands of Greece. Rome's involvement in Greek affairs was initially cautious. The Republic relied on diplomacy and alliances, supporting smaller Greek states against Macedonian aggression. Yet, Rome's growing interest in the region was not purely altruistic. Macedonia, under Philip V, was expanding aggressively, threatening allies of Rome and potentially altering the balance of power in the eastern Mediterranean. Rome recognized that ignoring Macedonian expansion could allow a rival power to dominate the region, undermining its own influence. The stage for confrontation was set during the First Macedonian War, 214 to 205 BC. Although that conflict ended inconclusively, it exposed the potential threat Macedonia posed to Rome's ambitions. Rome began forging alliances with Greek city-states such as Pergamum and Rhodes, ensuring that Macedonian aggression would face a united front. These alliances allowed Rome to intervene militarily while projecting an image of supporting Greek freedom, a clever combination of diplomacy and force. By the time of the Second Macedonian War, 200 to 197 BC, tensions had escalated. Rome sent the experienced consul Titus Quinctius Flamininus to lead its armies into Greece. Flamininus was not only a skilled general but also a shrewd diplomat, using promises of freedom to rally Greek city-states to Rome's side. The Republic's strategy was clear: confront Macedonia decisively, liberate Greece from its dominance, and expand Rome's influence in the eastern Mediterranean. Rome's expansion into Greece wasn't just about territory. It was a calculated move to neutralize a powerful rival and secure a strategic foothold. Their approach combined military precision, diplomatic finesse, and long-term planning, setting the stage for a confrontation that would test the strengths of both armies. The rigid phalanx of Macedonia versus the adaptable Roman legion. Prelude to Cynoscephalae. The road to Cynoscephalae was paved with tension, diplomacy, and previous skirmishes that tested both Macedonia and Rome. By 200 BC, the Second Macedonian War had officially begun, fueled by Philip V's continued expansion into Greece and Rome's desire to secure influence in the region. Philip had already demonstrated his military skill in earlier campaigns, expanding Macedonian territory and controlling key Greek city-states. He formed alliances with certain Hellenistic kingdoms, strengthened his army, and reinforced his dominance in Thessaly and central Greece. Macedonia seemed poised to consolidate power across the Greek peninsula. Rome, however, was determined to counter this rise. They sent Titus Quinctius Flamininus, a consul known for both military acumen and diplomatic skill, to lead Roman forces into Greece. Flamininus understood that direct confrontation with the Macedonian phalanx could be costly. Success would require not only battlefield strategy but also political maneuvering. In the months leading up to Cynoscephalae, both sides maneuvered across Thessaly's rolling hills. Skirmishes, reconnaissance, and positioning dominated the early stages. Flamininus cleverly secured alliances with Greek city-states like Thessalonica and Athens, presenting Rome as a liberator rather than a conqueror. This tactic weakened Philip's influence, isolating Macedonia politically as well as militarily. Philip, aware of Rome's advances, positioned his army near the hills of Cynoscephalae, using the terrain to his advantage. The Macedonian phalanx was formidable in open battle, but the uneven hills of Thessaly created vulnerabilities that the Romans would later exploit. By the time the two armies faced each other, both commanders knew the stakes were enormous. A Roman defeat could mean the resurgence of Macedonian power and the continued domination of Greece under Philip V. A Macedonian defeat, however, would shatter Philip's influence and mark the rise of Rome as the dominant force in the eastern Mediterranean. Cynoscephalae wasn't just another battle. It was the culmination of years of tension, preparation, and strategy, setting the stage for a historic clash that would forever alter the fate of Greece. The armies face off. On the hills of Cynoscephalae in 197 BC, two very different armies prepared for battle, each reflecting the military philosophies of their respective civilizations. The confrontation wasn't just physical, it was a clash of strategy, discipline, and adaptability. The Macedonian army, led by Philip V, was built around the phalanx, a formation that had dominated Greek warfare for centuries. Soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder, shields overlapping, long sarissas, spears up to 18 feet long, pointed outward like a wall of deadly spikes. The phalanx excelled in head-on combat on flat terrain, presenting a nearly impenetrable front. However, its strength was also its weakness. The formation was rigid, difficult to maneuver on uneven ground, and vulnerable to attacks from the flanks or rear. In contrast, the Roman legions, commanded by Titus Quinctius Flamininus, were highly flexible. Organized into maniples, smaller units that could move independently, the Roman soldiers could adapt quickly to changing conditions on the battlefield. The legion's shields, swords, and javelins allowed them to fight in close combat, flank enemies, or respond to unexpected threats. This flexibility gave the Romans a significant advantage, especially on the rolling, uneven hills of Thessaly. The geography of Cynoscephalae added another layer of complexity. The battlefield consisted of two hill ranges separated by valleys, creating natural choke points and areas where the phalanx could lose cohesion. Philip positioned parts of his phalanx on one hill, while deploying cavalry and lighter troops on the slopes and flanks to guard against Roman maneuvers. The Romans, aware of the terrain's impact on the phalanx, arranged their maniples in a way that allowed them to exploit gaps and adapt as the battle progressed. As dawn broke, the two armies faced each other. Thousands of soldiers, disciplined formations, and powerful weapons stood ready. The Macedonians relied on the strength of their phalanx, confident that their frontal assault would overwhelm the Romans. Meanwhile, the Romans trusted their training, flexibility, and the ability to read the battlefield in real time. The stage was set for a historic clash, rigid tradition versus adaptable innovation, a test of strategy and endurance that would determine the fate of Greece and the balance of power in the eastern Mediterranean. The opening moves. The Battle of Cynoscephalae began with careful maneuvering rather than an immediate clash, as both commanders tested each other's strengths and weaknesses. Philip V, confident in the power of his phalanx, positioned his troops on the hills to dominate the battlefield. He relied on the natural slope to give his phalanx momentum in a frontal assault, while cavalry units patrolled the flanks, ready to counter Roman movements. The Romans, under Flamininus, approached cautiously, understanding that a direct attack on the phalanx could be disastrous. Instead of committing their full force immediately, they sent smaller detachments to probe Macedonian positions, looking for gaps or weaknesses. The Roman light infantry and skirmishers harassed the phalanx from a distance, testing its response and forcing the Macedonians to spread their troops across the uneven terrain. Early skirmishes were fierce but localized. Macedonian soldiers struck with long sarissas, making frontal advances deadly for the Romans. However, the uneven hills created vulnerabilities in the phalanx, and Roman maniples began to exploit these gaps. Flamininus held back the main legions, waiting for the perfect moment to strike where the phalanx was most exposed. Philip attempted to seize the initiative, ordering part of his phalanx to advance down one of the hills, hoping to crush the Roman flank. At the same time, he relied on cavalry to harass Roman detachments and prevent them from gaining advantageous positions. The early movements demonstrated the classic strengths and weaknesses of both armies. The Macedonian phalanx was powerful but rigid, while the Romans were adaptable and disciplined. As the sun climbed higher, the stage was set for a decisive clash. Both armies had tested each other, casualties had already been sustained, and the commanders were aware that the battle would hinge on strategy and timing. The opening moves had revealed that while Philip relied on brute strength and tradition, Flamininus trusted flexibility and calculated risk, an approach that would ultimately determine the outcome of the battle. The clash of tactics. As the Battle of Cynoscephalae progressed, the confrontation between Rome and Macedonia escalated into a dramatic clash of military philosophies. The Macedonian phalanx, with its long sarissas and tightly packed formation, pushed forward with devastating force. Rows of soldiers pressed against the Romans, shields locked and spears extended, creating a nearly impenetrable wall. On flat terrain, this formation was lethal, but the uneven hills of Cynoscephalae tested its flexibility. The Roman legions, organized into smaller maniples, used their adaptability to counter the Macedonian rigidity. Instead of meeting the phalanx head-on in its strongest formation, the Romans targeted its flanks and weak points, striking where the tightly packed sarissas could not pivot. Roman skirmishers and light infantry harassed the phalanx from the sides, forcing gaps to appear in what had seemed an unbreakable line. One key moment occurred when Philip committed part of his phalanx to advance down a hill. This move, intended to crush the Roman flank, inadvertently created a vulnerability. The descending formation became exposed on one side. Flamininus seized the opportunity, sending Roman maniples to attack from both sides. The Macedonian soldiers, unable to turn quickly due to the length of their sarissas, found themselves surrounded and disorganized. Cavalry units on both sides attempted to influence the battle, but Roman coordination proved superior. Flamininus effectively redirected reserves to critical points. reinforcing weak spots and exploiting Macedonian errors. The phalanx, designed for frontal attacks, struggled to respond to these dynamic maneuvers, and its cohesion began to crumble. By mid-battle, the Macedonian army was fragmented across the hills, unable to maintain a unified front. The Romans, disciplined and flexible, exploited every opening. The clash of tactics demonstrated a fundamental lesson. Brute strength and tradition could dominate in ideal conditions, but adaptability, training, and battlefield awareness often decided the outcome. The Roman victory at Cynoscephalae was not due to superior numbers alone, but to the intelligent use of strategy, terrain, and timing. The clash of tactics highlighted the evolving nature of warfare in the ancient world and marked a turning point in Roman dominance over Greece. Turning the tide. The battle reached its critical moment as the Romans began to exploit the Macedonian phalanx's greatest weakness, its inflexibility. While the phalanx excelled in straight-line combat, the uneven hills of Cynoscephalae caused gaps to appear in its dense formation. Roman maniples, trained to act independently and respond to the terrain, moved swiftly to take advantage of these openings. Philip V, realizing his phalanx was under pressure, tried to regroup his forces, but the terrain and the Romans' fluid maneuvers made coordination nearly impossible. On one hill, a portion of the Macedonian line held firm, inflicting heavy casualties, but elsewhere, Roman maniples encircled and attacked from the sides and rear, creating panic among Macedonian soldiers. The cohesion of the phalanx began to crumble. Flamininus' leadership was decisive. He sent reserves to reinforce key points, ensured that his maniples maintained pressure across multiple fronts, and prevented Philip from mounting an effective counterattack. The Roman soldiers advanced with precision, turning what had started as a localized advantage into a full-scale collapse of the Macedonian lines. As panic spread through the phalanx, Macedonian soldiers struggled to maintain formation. Their long sarissas, which had been their greatest weapon, became a liability in close quarters and irregular terrain. Many Macedonian units were trapped and cut down, while others attempted to flee, only to be pursued relentlessly by Roman forces. The turning point at Cynoscephalae demonstrated a crucial lesson: flexibility and adaptability could defeat brute strength and rigid tradition. By exploiting gaps, coordinating reserves, and maintaining relentless pressure, the Romans transformed a tense standoff into a decisive victory. By the end of the day, the Macedonian army was shattered, suffering thousands of casualties, while the Romans secured a triumph that would change the political and military landscape of Greece. The battle was not just a victory, it was a demonstration of Rome's innovative approach to warfare and a clear signal that Macedonian dominance in Greece had come to an end. The aftermath of the battle. The Roman victory at Cynoscephalae sent shockwaves through Greece and the wider Mediterranean world. Macedonia, once the dominant power in Greece, had been decisively defeated, and its king, Philip V, was forced to confront the consequences. The Macedonian army was shattered, with thousands killed or captured, leaving Philip's forces unable to resist further Roman advances. Politically, the outcome marked a dramatic shift. Rome positioned itself as the protector of Greek city-states, presenting their victory as a liberation rather than outright conquest. Greek cities that had been under Macedonian control regained a measure of autonomy, though they were now bound to Rome's growing influence. Flamininus skillfully used diplomacy alongside military force, securing loyalty and alliances without the need for harsh occupation. The peace treaty imposed on Macedonia was severe but calculated. Philip had to cede territory, limit his army, and pay indemnities. More importantly, his capacity to interfere in Greek affairs was severely curtailed. This marked the beginning of Roman dominance in Greece, a region that had once been fiercely independent and politically fragmented. Cynoscephalae also had a profound impact on military history. The battle demonstrated the superiority of Roman tactics over the traditional phalanx, highlighting flexibility, coordination, and adaptability as decisive factors in warfare. Commanders and historians alike studied the battle, recognizing that rigid formations, no matter how powerful, could be outmaneuvered by disciplined and versatile troops. The aftermath of the battle reshaped the Mediterranean balance of power. Rome emerged not only as a victor on the battlefield but also as a rising political hegemon, capable of projecting influence far beyond the Italian peninsula. Macedonian dominance ended, Greece entered a new era under Roman supervision, and the stage was set for Rome's eventual expansion into Asia Minor and the broader Hellenistic world. Cynoscephaly was more than a battle, it was a turning point in history, demonstrating the combination of military genius, strategic diplomacy, and calculated flexibility that would define Rome's rise to power. Significance in the Macedonian Wars. The Battle of Cynoscephaly was not just a single victory on the battlefield. It was a defining moment in the Macedonian Wars and a turning point for the entire eastern Mediterranean. By defeating Philip V, Rome effectively ended Macedonian dominance in Greece, securing its own position as a major power far from the Italian peninsula. One of the most important outcomes was the demonstration of military innovation over traditional strength. The Macedonian phalanx had been considered almost invincible for centuries, but at Cynoscephaly, the Romans proved that adaptability, flexibility, and coordination could overcome even the most formidable formations. This lesson would influence Roman military strategy for generations and highlight the evolution of warfare in the ancient world. Politically, the battle allowed Rome to present itself as the liberator of Greece, gaining the loyalty of city-states that had previously been under Macedonian control. Athens, Thessalonica, and other cities regained a measure of autonomy, though under Rome's protective oversight. This combination of military might and diplomatic strategy ensured that Rome's influence would endure far beyond the battlefield. Cynoscephaly also marked the end of the Second Macedonian War. With Macedonia weakened, Philip V was forced to accept restrictive peace terms. He ceded territory, reduced his military capabilities, and agreed to Roman oversight in Greek affairs. The Macedonian kingdom would never again pose the same threat to Rome, signaling a long-term shift in the balance of power across the region. Finally, the battle demonstrated that Rome's strategic vision extended beyond conquest. Victory at Cynoscephaly was not simply about defeating an enemy, it was about securing political dominance, controlling strategic regions, and projecting influence across the eastern Mediterranean. This combination of battlefield success and diplomatic foresight set a precedent that would define Rome's approach to expansion for centuries. Cynoscephaly was a turning point, showing that Rome was not just a regional power in Italy, but an emerging empire capable of reshaping the political and military landscape of the ancient world. Outro. The Battle of Cynoscephaly was more than a clash between two armies. It was a defining moment in the history of Greece and the rise of Rome. On the rolling hills of Thessaly, the disciplined Roman legions proved that flexibility, adaptability, and strategic intelligence could overcome the legendary might of the Macedonian phalanx. This battle reshaped the political map of Greece. Macedonia, once the dominant power, was forced into submission, while Rome emerged as the protector and eventual overlord of the Greek city-states. The victory secured Rome's influence in the eastern Mediterranean and set the stage for future expansion into Asia Minor and beyond. Cynoscephaly also left a lasting legacy in military history. It was a clear demonstration that innovation and tactical ingenuity could triumph over rigid tradition. Commanders and historians would study this battle for centuries, learning lessons about strategy, terrain, and the decisive value of adaptable forces. Ultimately, Cynoscephaly wasn't just about victory on the battlefield. It was about the rise of Rome as a dominant power, the decline of Macedonian influence, and the reshaping of an entire region. The clash of legions and phalanx symbolized a broader transition in warfare and politics, one that would define the Mediterranean world for generations. Rome had proven its strength, its cunning, and its vision, and in doing so, had changed the course of history forever.